They acknowledge that over 78% of all transactions in Zimbabwe are now conducted on a cash basis in US dollars. So the de-dollarization experiment has failed and failed in absolute terms. The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagranto many years ago, 2008, 2009. People are not prepared to use a currency that they don't trust. And economics is about trust. A currency is 80% trust. The remaining 20% is microeconomic hygiene. So Zimbabweans don't have trust in this regime. The social contract has collapsed. So any attempt to use the local currency is a waste of time. One of the things that has been announced is the takeover of all external debts by the RBZ. This is firstly unconstitutional because only Parliament can actually assume the debt of any entity outside central government. And remember, in terms of Section 327 and in terms of Section 300 of the Constitution, all debts by the state must have prior approval by Parliament. Parliament controls the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So this is the third assumption of debt by central government of RBZ debt. But if you look at these assumptions, like take the last one, for instance, of 3.5 billion US dollars, hidden in that debt assumption were serious, unlawful, and illegal quasi-fiscal activities committed by the central bank. Rogue, heinous, odious activities. Now we are being made to assume a third round of RBZ debt. A large part of that is about 8 billion US dollars owed to the African Import-Export Bank. But we don't know what the Reserve Bank used that money for. So this regime, this policy regime of merely accepting debt without scrutiny, without accountability is not only unconstitutional but purely unacceptable. Taxpayers are being made to bear billions and billions of arbitrage, of rent money, of state capture done by a bank, the central bank, that is clearly rogue, that clearly has no respect to the basic macroeconomic infrastructure of checks and balances that are codified in our constitution. So that on its own is a complete a disaster. Third, this is a central bank that is at the center of money laundering. The Gold Mafia documentary exposed the role of the central bank in clothing illegalities by a veneer of legality. The issuance of the gold coin, the issuance of gold-backed digital currencies are all instruments of arbitrage, are all instruments of rent. Why should Zimbabwe mint gold coins when it doesn't have reserves and when it needs the gold to back up its currency? Zimbabwe's currency is on a free fall. In 2 weeks alone, Zimbabwean currency has collapsed by over 1,000%. The rate right now, as I'm talking to you, is 1:3,000. That means Zimbabwe has no currency to talk about. And for Zimbabwe to restore credibility to its currency, it needs reserves, which could be gold reserves. So why would a reserve bank then mint gold coins, which are so fungible, which are easy instruments of laundering? Unless that is really the idea. And if this is the real idea, it confirms what we have called in Parliament, that there should be a forensic audit of the central bank. And for the Minister of Finance then to say that is okay, we'll continue with gold coins, we'll continue with a gold-backed digital, gold coins is rogue economics, unheard of in economics, and it's looting the country. Africa in general loses around 90 billion US dollars annually in the form of illicit financial flows. Zimbabwe is a contributor, a major contributor of that. And I reckon we are losing about 5 to 6 billion US dollars in illicit financial flows. $1 billion in gold, billion in cigarettes, $1 billion in chrome, probably $2 billion in lithium. It can't go on. People of Zimbabwe are poor. 79% of Zimbabweans are living below the poverty datum line, yet the country is rich. This is a classical case of the Dutch disease, the resource case, that you are poor, yet you are flooded by resources and rich resources, world-class resources for that matter. You see, in their own documents, if you read the monetary policy statement of January 2023, they acknowledge that over 78% of all transactions in Zimbabwe are now conducted on a cash basis in US dollars. So the de-dollarization experiment has failed and failed in absolute terms. The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagranto many years ago, 2008, 2009. People are not prepared to use a currency that they don't trust. And economics is about trust. A currency is 80% trust. The remaining 20% is microeconomic hygiene. So Zimbabweans don't have trust in this regime. The social contract has collapsed. So any attempt to use the local currency is a waste of time. It's a complete waste of time. So what we propose is that we dollarize, we use the US dollar, we pay civil servants in US dollars, but of course we need change. So you float the Zimbabwean dollar, just float the Zimbabwean dollar, let it find its natural mark, abolish the Dutch auction system, because it's not a fair discovery of price. And it's a controlled one. Yesterday, in those new measures, they announced that they would fine-tune the Dutch auction system by a pre-announced envelope. It's still a controlled system. An auction is a free market where there's free entry on both supply and demand side. You can't have an auction when there is only one person, i.e. the central bank, that is supplying the foreign currency. It's not a Dutch auction system. So, you ask me about the way forward. This is the way forward. Number one, repeal SI 33 of 2019, which became law in the form of Finance Act number 7 of 2019. In other words, and in simple terms, reverse the de-dollarization process. Dollarize Zimbabwe. Pay pensioners in US dollars. Pay workers in US dollars. Number two, float the Zimbabwean dollar. Allow the Zimbabwean dollar to find its natural resting place. Number three, shut down the Reserve Bank. Replace it with a currency, board. Remove export surrender requirements. Restore the viability of pensions. Pensioners are suffering. Restore savings in this market. Restore social services. Attend to gross capital formation. Deal with the debt crisis. The debt crisis, which is now a sovereign headwind. 120% of GDP. That's not sustainable. Deal with corruption. Corruption is putting a premium on this economy, scandal after scandal. Attend to the ease of doing business and improve Zimbabwe's competitiveness so that we can attract foreign direct investment. Put a full stop to the land question by making sure that you give title deeds to everyone on land right now, which title deeds can be securitized and hypothecated so that farming can be financed by the financial sector, by the banking sector. Fund the social services, in particular education and health. Introduce a grant to poor people in our country, whether it's $50 per month, but introduce a grant. South Africa has a grant. We can afford a grant. Alter the accumulation model of this country from one based on extraction to one based on beneficiation and value chains. We need to industrialize. So we need to alter the accumulation model from one based on extraction. If you wake up Cecil John Rhodes right now. You won't get lost because the economy is still exporting its raw materials. So you need to alter the accumulation model so that we go to industrialization, we go to beneficiation, we go to value addition, and very importantly, attend to infrastructure. Energy, we need 4,000 megawatts of energy. A dam capacity, 76% of our natural rains flow to the Indian Ocean. So create a situation where we capture at least 30 to 40% of our natural rain through creation of dams and irrigation schemes. The state of our roads, with great respect to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the port capital of sub-Saharan Africa, the railway system is collapsed. We used to have an electric railway system. It has collapsed. So gross capital formation is very, very important. But all these things that I've mentioned are a waste of time unless there is a change in governance and leadership, which is why the next coming election is a critical election. It's an election to save Zimbabwe. It's an election to transform Zimbabwe. But it could also be an election to sink Zimbabwe if it's not allowed to be a free and fair election.